Changing Times, Changing Worlds Conference. And we cover all kinds of things that are occult, metaphysical, paranormal, supernatural, any of that stuff, which oddly enough gets into a whole lot of our alternative spirituality. And whereas many of the people in my generation were first generation, or their families had kept it quiet for a while. We got second and third generation people going now, and that's what we're talking about tonight. And I've got shall I say Mama Kimble or Mary Kimble?
Either one.
As our guest, who has spoken. I've raised kids. I see among the guests that we've got Cami has raised kids, Katie LaFawn has raised kids. Lots of us have raised pagan kids, so we may have multiple perspectives. But let's start out with Mary, who was huge in I think about the CP, I'm forgetting the initials. Introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Right. So I'm Mary Kimball. I have a bio written up on Facebook. So if you like to have the details, I didn't realize how long it was until I sat down and actually read it on the Facebook page. But I'm involved in a lot of different things. I have 2 children. And what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is experiences that we had and how we handled them. And I'm going to give you some background information as well about our family, so that you could have a better understanding of like who I am and what the environment was that we were living in. So I was raised Christian, both Methodist and Catholic, because my parents were divorced and we had 2 different churches we were dealing with. I've been pagan now for over 28 years. I have 2 children. I have a 30-year-old daughter and I have a 35-year-old son, who I'm very, very proud of. When my children were born, we were still Christian at that time. And I went to have my daughter baptized. And one of the reasons we felt it was very important to us was because my daughter was premature by 10 weeks. And she only weighed like 1 pound, 12 ounces.
Oh my.
And yeah, so there was a lot of very close calls during her stay in the hospital for 2 months. So we wanted to have that taken care of. So I went to the minister and I said that I would like to have my daughter baptized. And he said, well, I really haven't seen you at church all that much. And a baptism kind of is like is for the whole church. So my husband and I talked about it and I said, let's go to church every week. We used to do it all the time. You could do this. So we did. And then we did get my daughter baptized. But I realized at that point that this was not for me. This religion was no longer fulfilling my needs. And because I believe your faith is what is inside of you, it is your religion as to how you express that. And I also believe if you're on the right path, that when you do a ceremony of any kind, whether it's going to church or doing a circle or whatever it is, that it feeds your soul the same way good food feeds your body. And when I went to my first circle, that's how I felt. I felt like I went in, spiritually feeling heavy. And when I came out, I didn't feel that way anymore. So I realized, I think this is the path for me, and that's where I had been. Now, when I first started, I was Wiccan, because that's the group of people I met. And then in later years, I realized I really wasn't, but I'm more heathen. So I'm very eclectic in regards to being heathen, but it calls to me, it calls to my family line. So I was like, nope, this should be where I am. So as for my kids, excuse me, I'm just going to get a drink. As for my kids, I always told my children that our faith was not something to be ashamed of, but it was not also something to be yelling from the rooftops. Okay. And that partly was because of the times we were in. talking to somebody and explaining to them that you're pagan and what that religion is can get very tense, because a lot of people have preconceived notions. They're actually ignorant of things, but they have these notions from experience, whether it was school or their family or movies or whatever. So it's something I always told my children that we were worried about, because we were always afraid that there may be a teacher or some school person who ended up dealing with my child, finding out about our religion, and then because of their own feelings started a process in which you call in DCF, and then next thing you know is you're being investigated, and it gets kind of crazy. And I know some people who had these kind of things happen to them, so that's where that fine line is, so but over time issues arose with my kids in school. And I remember the first time was with my son. He was about 10 years old, and they would do this reading theater. They would pick a author, and they would pick, I don't know, 4 or 5 stories, and then they take this little snippet of the story, and that's what they would read on stage. I thought this was wonderful. What a great idea. I think reading theaters or reading stages are wonderful things. So here I am, front row, sitting, and I'm listening to them talk, and they're doing it all from Roald Dahl. Okay. Who I already have a problem with, because a lot of his stories really seems to focus on the horrible adults in these children's lives, and how hard they have to struggle to get to hopefully the good thing at the end. So that's what they picked. They picked The Big Friendly Giant. They picked, I think it was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And they picked The Witches. And so here I am sitting in the front row, and I'm listening to this stuff. So with Big Friendly Giant, the part that they picked was talking about the different races of people that the giants eat. Like one of them was, we don't eat Greeks because they're greasy. And we don't eat Englishmen because they taste like tea. I think I could be wrong on that, but there was like 4 or 5 of those statements. So that got me a little pissed off to begin with. Then they got to The Witches, and the snippet they took out of that was, let me tell you about real witches, not the make-believe witches. And it goes on to say how they have no hair, they're always scratching their head because they wear a wig, they spit blue, but above all else, they hate children. And I'm sitting there, and it must have just been my aura at that point, because my son said to me, my God, Mom, the people around you started inching away. He goes, you look so angry. I said, yeah, I am angry. And I realized I had to do something about it. I had to go and address this. But on the same side of that, I go, I have to address this in a manner that this person I'm talking to isn't going to shut me down. So I felt if I go in, my first words out of my mouth is, hey, I'm a witch or I'm a pagan, and that statement you made about witches insulted me, I don't believe I would have gotten really far with that. So I always try to start with things when I'm talking, especially authority figures. I always try to start with things that are kind of calm. So what I said to them when I went in is I said, I think reading theater is a great idea. I think it's great for the kids. However, I have some concerns about the author that you chose. And they're like, well, why? And I said, well, first of all the adults in those books are terrible people. Those children suffer greatly throughout it. I said, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best things for children in 4th grade to be reading. Okay. And I said, the other thing was some of the parts of the book that you used, I had problems with. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, like, the giant wouldn't eat Greeks because they're greasy. I said, I remember hearing somewhere along the line that actually used to be kind of a slang term that they used way back when. I said, so, having those statements about different culture, different people, I said, if I was somebody who was Greek, or if I was somebody who was an Englishman, or I was a witch sitting in that audience, I would have been insulted, you know? And so we talked about it a little bit more, and we discussed it, and they said, you're right. That, you know, we're going to have to look at the contents of what we decide to do to allow, you know, to do this for the children. And I said, okay, fine. But like I said, I try to go in, I talk about something that's really kind of calm, you know, and then I work up to where I want to inject something in regards to what is the real problem. Because I always go in with a goal. My goal was for them to realize using this kind of material is not a good idea. So they got that across, which is what I was looking for. Let's see, my daughter, when she was in high school, they were reading Lord of the Flies. And the teacher sent home this paper about the book, which included passages from the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches. And this book was written by, I understand, 2 monks, and it was used, you know, to help identify witches or demon people, witch workers and stuff, and how to torture them. And I was quite concerned about them making connections to get it. Okay. So I went to the school and I spoke to the teacher and the head of the department. And I explained, you know, why she used this reference to explain the Lord of the Flies. And we talked about, you know, what it was. And then they said to me, so your problem is you don't want your child to read the book. And I'm like, no, I think children should read this book. I said, my problem is how you are using a reference to this book by saying that it was saying that the god of the witches was Beelzebub, which translates into the Lord of the Flies. Okay, so it's like you're making this very subtle connection between, you know, people who may be, you know, claim to be a witch are evil people because they have this god, you know what I'm saying? So there's this connection here. And so we did talk about it. Actually, I even called in the vice principal to talk about it. And he agreed. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see where you're making that connection here. We shouldn't have done that. So it was, you know, we got our point across and it worked out. My daughter had her own issues at times. One of them that she told me about was she was in a class for Greek and Roman mythology, which I think everybody in the world takes. And the teacher started out by saying, in this class, Greek and Roman gods, we're going to talk about Greek and Roman gods. Now, nobody worships this religion any longer. And of course, now this is my daughter was 17 at that time. Okay. She raises her head and she goes, that's not true. And they were like, what do you mean? And she's like, I worship these gods. And he's like, what? She's like, yeah. She said, how can you sit up there and say nobody worships them? And one of the girls, you know, so a conversation started in the class. And at one point, my daughter came out to say she was pagan. One girl said to her, oh, well, you hide that really well. And she goes, I don't understand. What do you mean? She said, well, you know, the green skin, I can't see it on your arm or anything. And my daughter looked, she goes, are you serious? She goes, well, yeah. She said, I understand pagans are witches, and if you're a witch, you have green skin. So my daughter's like, well, you can come over and try to rub it off if you like, which of course she didn't, you know. But I'm like, you know, my daughter handled it well. There was no problem. I got no phone calls, you know. So, you know, that those are the kind of things that we dealt with that I don't know if people have as much now. You're talking 30, 35 years ago that this was happening, where I know in the area I lived, there was more people that were pagan and found other people. I mean, I found my way to the path by a woman coming to a workshop at my job, and she was wearing a goddess amulet, you know, thing, talisman. And I looked at it and said, oh, I really like that. She looked at me, she goes, are you a sister? I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, I don't think I look like a nun, because that's all I knew when I heard sister. But we talked to each other a little bit more. She became a very good friend of mine. But she was the one who opened the door for me to find out about this. So like I say with my children, it's like, you just got to be careful. I said, a lot of times when you're talking to someone, look at them, look at their face, look them in the eye, because if you start using terms, you can almost see doors closing, where if you come out and you say, well, I'm a witch, you get that little look, from the person, and you can kind of like see things filing in their head. You're going, wow, this is going to turn bad. So
could I jump in?
Yes.
And say, you did well what I did badly. My daughter in first grade, Halloween, brought home a picture that she'd colored of a hag with a green face. And I said, why, Diana, why did you?
Looks like she's frozen up.
Frozen.
Yeah. That's why I'm co-host, to keep things going, to let people in.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll be back.
You have much
in a minute or two. There's a thunderstorm up where she is. That tends to wreck her.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then you didn't hear my embarrassing story. Maybe the gods don't want me to tell it. I got, my daughter brought home a coloring page from first grade, and she colored the crone green, and I was on the phone, and I was kind of standing back from myself, listening to my mouth go as I went up one side and down the other about how dare you, we have so many witch friends. And I was just kind of saying, shut up, but I just couldn't seem to stop myself. And
it was very angry.
So you did it well. Yay, go you.
Well, I found that some of the things that I found worked best was to go in with a goal in mind. Like, what is it do I want to accomplish by addressing this? I don't want to scold somebody. I don't want to yell at them, because 10 to 1, they don't know they're doing anything that's a problem, because they don't know anything about it. And it's really ignorance more than anything else. So I go in with the goal saying, I want to walk out with this change, whatever that change is. And that's the intention I go in with. And I've never had my kids taken away or have somebody drag me off.
When you've seen other people lose their kids,
yes,
it makes you paranoid.
Yeah. I knew a young girl who was pregnant at 16, I think it was, and she was delivering the baby, and she was there with her mother, and they found out they were pagan. And the minute they did, they called the social worker, and they were claiming that because of their faith, they have an abusive tendency to their children. And I don't remember now whether they actually took the baby away or if it just went into investigation and they were able to settle it. But it was that simple.
But you do have to remember that was during the 90s with the satanic panic.
Yes.
All of those BS stories were going around.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But it's that simple. It can take just one person thinking they're doing a good deed and be adamant about it. And that's where you run into the problem. I try to teach people wherever I go. I mean, I've done like classes at, churches for youth groups. And I do teach. I've been a human book down in Wilton. So I've been doing this, for a long time. I remember my most interesting place was when I went to Virginia, and I had just heart failure, and they rushed me to the nearest hospital, which happened to be a Catholic hospital. So I was there like 2:00 in the morning, and the intake lady comes in and she's talking to me, and we're going through it, and she got to religion. I didn't think twice about saying I was pagan. So she's like, pagan, what is that? And I explained it to her. At the time I was Wiccan, so it was that kind of, information. But I basically said, she sat there for 2 hours and talked to me about it. And when she went to she said, she goes, I'm so glad I had this opportunity to talk to you, because we are getting more people coming in saying that they're that religion and we just don't know what to do.
This is something that I think I urge people to do. That one of the things hospitals, they say, well, why don't they ever have something for the pagans? And I said, because we don't have clergy as such, and they can't call pagan clergy if they don't have a phone number. So if you have the time to donate to your local hospital, then go take whatever credentials in and speak calmly to the hospital administrator, and you might be getting a phone call in the middle of the night from somebody who would really like to talk to a Gita or a high priestess or somebody, and but they can't call somebody if they don't have that number. So if we don't step forward, they're not trying to discriminate against us, they just don't have the access.
And
So-
that is something that I have been thinking about doing once I've retired, because working, it's kind of hard to do that. I've just also I'm on my last stage of getting my certification for my birth doula, and I've got my badge certification for my end of life doula. So I'm looking forward to kind of using all these skills to be able to provide, services to people, and, especially if you have people in hospitals that may be dealing with end of life issues, because they're there. It's always good to have somebody who has the same kind of faith to talk to, because a lot of time the other faiths, they just don't have a clue as to what's going on.
Would a universal life certificate work? Probably would be, you'd probably get a fisheye, but I think Mary's doula training would serve her in better stead. I'm hoping we can get you to talk about that later, but right now we're talking about parenting. And I too have seen parents at the worst. I've found in my limited experience was during custody battles during a divorce.
Oh, big and bad.
All you have to do is get back, say, yes, we were pagans, but I'm better now and I've gone back to being a Christian, and therefore she's a witch, so therefore I get the kid. And in a custody battle, it is handled not by a jury, but by a judge. And if the judge is predisposed, you cannot get a change of venue. At least in New Hampshire, you can't. One judge, if you believe the judge is prejudiced against your religion, you can't do anything about it.
Right.
Which is a hard thing. So
and people don't always realize how those chain of events can happen. You can, come in and talk to a clerk who may have a misunderstanding about your faith, especially if the case is about anything to do with your faith. Okay. And they may in turn then talk to the judge, and kind of give their point, and that gets in their heads. We never know where it can come from. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
So
I have found that when I was raising the kids, my biggest issue was teaching the kids not to out Santa Claus.
Okay.
Well, if that's that in the first to third grade, when people are starting to wonder whether there's a Santa Claus, you don't want your pagan kid proudly trying to explain to them that Santa Claus is an avatar who is being drawn into, like drawing down the moon. It's like, don't try to explain it to them. That's their thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. It's like, don't be ashamed of your faith, but we don't shout it from the rooftops either. We don't need to recruit people. You know, it's not, we don't need everybody to know what we're doing, where we're doing, when we're doing, you know. So those are the kind of things that you just have to be subtle about, you know. And if it's meant to be, you'll meet people who are the same. I find you run into people of that faith, that, you know, in the very strangest areas where you go, I don't think I'd ever do that, but it happens, and that's what opens the door.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear from other parents who have children, if they've had any experiences like that, and if so, how did they handle it?
There's a round resounding silence. Now, Cammie, I know you've raised 2 boys and
Sure.
1 conference.
I got sort of distracted for a minute. Repeat the question, please.
Just as we're soliciting experiences as raising pagan kids, did you have anything that might be useful for other people to hear?
I was very fortunate. We didn't really have a lot of difficulties. I had one kid who followed my lead very closely, wanted to be part of whatever circle, whatever ritual we were at, wanted his own first tools at the age of 4. We used a lot of magical thinking as part of their early parenting, you know, oh, night terrors, here's some invisible spray for invisible monsters, you know, meditation for kids. I used, I think, pretty much the same rules for discussing paganism as I did for using strong language, which is don't get the other kids in trouble. Don't put the adults in a situation where they have to get in trouble or get you in trouble. Be careful. Other people have other beliefs. You can listen. And if they back away, if they're not interested in what you're talking about, you back away. I had no trouble with them going along with their friends to church or church picnic or whatever. You know, I just made sure I knew what they were hearing. I think it was about grade 2, towards the end of early elementary, that there was a certain amount of, so-and-so says I'm going to hell, is that true? And it's like, well, okay, differences in beliefs, and on we go. And it just, simple explanations seemed to solve it. They were part of a lot of our home rituals, family rituals. Nothing we did wasn't really suitable for kids or for their friends to participate in if they were around. We kept it simple. And I never said, you can't believe this thing. If you're seeing dragons, okay, let's talk about dragons. If you're seeing monsters, let's talk about monsters. In terms of building pagan ethics, I think my very favorite story to tell, when Tim was about 5, I think 4 or 5, I read a story retold by Joseph Bruchak, who is an Abenaki storyteller from Vermont, called How Gluskabe Bound Wind Eagle. And, you know, it was a little trickster story. And Tim was enthralled. He says, can I worship Gluskabe? And I said, well, I don't, or can I worship Wind Eagle? And I said, well, I don't really experience the winds that way myself, but if you do, go for it. But a relationship's a relationship. If you start building a relationship with a god, you can't just drop it like you might a toy that you're bored with. He says, oh, well, maybe I'd better not do that. From then until the age of 14, this child saw eagles everywhere. Bald eagles, golden eagles, plastic eagles, toy eagles, images of eagles, eagles in the clouds. Okay, it was Tim's eagle thing. But I had built this notion that this stuff's real. We're not fooling around. And then, of course, my younger one, Phelan, was like, oh, well, if Tim's doing things with eagles, I got to do wolves. And I'm like, really? Okay, tell me more about that. And the funny thing is that Phelan chose the name Phelan, which they claim means little wolf. I'm not seeing it. And, but I don't know Scots Gaelic, so I could be wrong. and has that same very protective pack mentality that is one of the gifts of the wolf. So, all righty, they're going to follow their own pagan path. Tim very closely follows my ways of doing things, pagan with a side of Wiccan with a side of druidry, and goes Greek where I go Irish. Phelan still claims to be an atheist, but will happily play with tarot cards or help their friends with herbal medicine or magic or whatever. And part of being pagan, part of being a polytheist is I don't get to say you're wrong. Yeah. I get to say take responsibility. That's about the best I get. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, it sounds like you handled it well. And it's funny because when you were talking about that, one of the things I thought was when my children were very young, we decided we were going to establish house rules. And we really thought about it. And we said, we want our children to have choices, because if they have choices when they're little and they screw up, then when they have choices when they're older, hopefully they've learned from that. So we wrote out our house rules, and it basically says there's a word that says respect. And then next to it's a paragraph, and it explains what respect is. If you respect others, you don't break their toys, you don't vandalize, you don't steal. When you're in somebody's home, you want to be nice to them the way you'd want them to be nice to you. And then you have responsibility. And then we had hearing and being heard. And that talked about how you have the right to say whatever you want, so long as you are not being disrespectful with what you say. Okay. But when it's our turn, you have to hear what we have to say. So and then we had one about sex, drugs, and something else. And it basically said, we want you to wait till you're 18, because at that point, your body is more mature and hopefully your mind is more mature so that you can make good choices. And at the very bottom, it says, you have a choice in your behavior, but you do not have a choice of the consequences. So that's what we did with our kids. Every kid that came into my house, they got to read those rules. And we really did not have much of a problem. I have a tendency to swear a lot. It's just who I am. And so I always told my children, very honest, I said, swearing is adult words. They're adult words. I said, and when you turn 18, if you want to curse and swear till your head explodes, you can do that. And you want to know why? And they go, why? I said, because I can ask you to leave. If you're being rude or saying terrible things, I will tell you to get out. And they were always really good about it. They never swore in front of me until after they were 18, but it's like, I'm not changing my whole behavior. You're just going to have to learn to adjust to that,
We never thought to actually write down our house rules. I think they were codified, but not really written. And they were pretty basic. Now, both my kids are on the autism spectrum, although the younger one, Phelan, is less impacted by autism than I am, or at least very differently. So I missed it for a number of years. Mm-hmm. But so the rules were basically, don't hurt. No hurting yourself, others, or stuff. No insults, which includes the word shut up, because there's no way to say shut up that isn't an insult. Yeah. Find other ways to say please stop. No destruction of self, other, or property. No insults. No lying.
Yeah.
If you need to tell us something, tell us. And the rules are the rules. You can always lobby for a change. You can always ask what they're about. Sometimes we're going to have to tell you later, but they're there for a reason. We don't make many. You have to listen to them. I think that was about it, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, when Tim was about 4, he was very frustrated playing with his Legos, and I heard his little 4-year-old voice saying, okay, what am I going to do about language? And I went in and I said, all right, these are words of power. Don't waste them. Don't abuse them. Don't overuse them. they need to be appropriate. You need to calibrate them appropriately, and no insults, So, and that was where, don't teach them to your friends and get your friends in trouble. Don't say them in front of adults who are then required to bust you, be careful. Well, this lasted until Tim got to high school, and he got in the car with me and he was turning the air blue. And I said, dude, language. He says, well, my environment. I said, dude, I'm your environment. He said, what, at school? That's right. You keep it at school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't think we had to discuss language again until Tim was probably out of university.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you have strong rules, or I shouldn't say rules, guidelines. I think where people have a lot of problem is when parents, especially new parents, decide, I'm going to make rules, and all my rules are going to start with don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and it's not like, don't insult. It's like, do not, or don't, lie, don't steal, don't this, and it gets to that point where it takes away choices from the child, so it's like, okay, don't lie. Well, we never want our children to lie, right? Nobody does, but kids do. And
but you have to make it safe.
Right, when they think it's safe. I remember doing it to my son. I dropped him off downtown. He was in high school. Nope, junior high. And we dropped him off at the Max. And him and his cousin. And I said to the both of them, stay at the Max. Do not go walking downtown. So they said, okay, fine, we won't. Right? We're up and down. I left and forgot I didn't give them money for snacks at the Max. I turned around, came back down the road to catch both of them halfway up to the main road. I pulled over and I'm like, get in my car. Now I know my son doesn't lie to me. However, my nephew lies terribly all the time, has done it all his life. And so, of course, my nephew's first one about, oh, we're sorry. There was a friend that I said, you know what? You need to shut up. And I said, and Jeremy, now you're going to tell me what's going on, and you better not lie. And he says, okay, Mom, honestly, we were going down to Archway to just go get a soda and then come back. I'm like, okay, I believe that, because that's where they were headed. And so I said, all right, so this is your choices. I will drop you back at the Max. I will give you your money for snacks. I will be back at this time. I said, or you can both go home. I said, but if you leave this Max, I said, you'll never know if I'm parked down the road or on a side road or just cruising like a shark. And they all knew I would do it. So they were like, okay, we'll stay. So they did. They went to the Max. They had a good time. And I picked them up. But it's like, because I know I can't trust my nephew, it's more about the life he lives, that this has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's really nothing we can do about it. He's a grown man now, and he still does it. And he just thinks he's getting away with it. So
my kids have a foster brother who had come from a very tight disciplinarian family. And he had learned that the only way to get any kind of, release was to lie to his mom. He couldn't successfully live within her rules. So he got very good at lying. And so when he first came into our house for about because he lived with us for a while, they got home from Penzig and had a house fire. Oops. So he lived with us, and his mom lived with Alazond for a while, actually, for a number of reasons. Well, the first 2 weeks, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. And then he thought, oh my gosh, there are no rules here, because he had never experienced liberal parenting. So we had to introduce him to these rules, and that there were consequences, and that the degree of his freedom depended on his ability to function as part of the unit.
Gotcha.
And that he was entitled to be his own person, but not a disruptive influence. And the funny thing is, because he's a couple of years older than Tim and neurotypical, or at least differently neurodivergent, he was able to teach Tim how to be a teenager. when to push the boundaries, how to decide what rules to break in a way that was very age appropriate and gave him the opportunity to then decide how rebellious was safe.
That's good.
And yeah, it was a great gift.
Can we invite Katie in? Because I know she's got kids.
Please.
Can we unmute you? There you go.
Okay. I didn't want to get into the flow of what you were saying, though. You were having a really fruitful conversation. The issue of rules and things like that with pagan parenting is such an interesting topic, because rules in general, I think we approach it differently as pagans. So I like the use of the word guidelines. With my kids, I have a 12-year-old and I have a 5-year-old, talking about why we do certain things and what the consequences are and natural consequences and things like that. Not that it's foolproof, there are difficult moments too, but yeah, I really like the reframing of it. And I think it's a touchy thing. And I think that pagan parents are still figuring it out. My mother was pagan, but very closeted. And so she raised me in, not Christian, but not the sort of way that I've seen a lot of the other, I practice with Earth Spirit, watching those pagan parents, their modeling, it's, very different. And the choices that Chris and I have made with our own kids. So it's interesting, those guidelines. We've been very lucky. We live in a very small town. And, in Dexter, my older child, was just starting kindergarten, things like that. We did a lot of volunteering in town. And the local UCC minister called for interfaith. And they're like, if there's anyone who'd like to come chat with me, you should come chat. And so we went and chatted with him, and that was lovely. And we got to participate in a bunch of interfaith services. And so we are the pagans in town. And it doesn't hurt that we play flute and harp. And, we bring them up to Yule, or they call it Christmas and things like that. Like it ingratiates us. They like when we come on down because we play pretty music. And, we're the diversity for them, I guess. But, so the school, knows who we are, knows that we're pagan. And it's fun because my older child, there were 2 kids in his very small class. There's like 12 kids in his class, and it's 1 class per grade, that were quietly like, we're pagan too. And I'm like, that's cool, because we're fairly public. They're not. But, come over and stuff like that. And I've roped one of them into Western Mass pagan pride at this point, but that's a story for a different day. And my younger child, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tammy.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for you to finish speaking. I was going to ask how you have handled puberty and sexuality with the older, how you're handling the whole kindergarten lesson about real versus imaginary as a pagan, stuff like that.
Those are 2 delightful topics. The older one, we're still getting started. He's like, Mom, I need to talk to Aiden. I'm like, okay. So, you do the phone call and he's talking with my friend, Aiden, his friend too, whatever. Age is a construct. Anyway, and he's like, is armpit hair normal? Should I pull it out? And Aiden's like, it's totally normal. You're totally fine. Don't pull it out. And so, and of course, like a puberty talk, I overshare because I don't think there's anything wrong with bodies. We are a very sex positive culture, at least in Earth Spirit, and I think in the wider pagan community. And so there's nothing wrong with bodies. And so we explain things in, with all the terminologies, like this is the vas deferens, and this is what happens when this, happens. So he's known how it all works since he was about 8 years old. So, and we have books available on the shelf. I'm just curious about that. You were asking a question about kindergarten. Real and imaginary and all those things. We talk about how it's fuzzy, how it's gray, and misted, if you will, like, dreams. Are dreams real? It's like, well, they're not real in the sense that you can, pick up the item that you created when you were dreaming. But dreams are real. We have dreams. Everyone has a dream. And so it's a little bit more complicated. And he hasn't reached, the age of reason where, like, everything has started to kind of settle into its own little container. And so it's a really magical time for my younger child, where we don't want to impose containers for him. So rather than give him answers, I mostly ask him questions and let him kind of lead the conversation. And I don't know if that's an answer like that you were hoping for, but mostly just ask questions.
No, I think what you're saying about dreams is lovely. What I did with my kids about the whole real imaginary thing, because that is part of the curriculum, is to add objective reality, subjective or personal reality, and imaginary. And the difference between, hey, I made up this cool story versus I saw this with my inside eyes, not everybody else will be able to see it, versus, yeah, that happened and anybody else could see it, do it, know about it. And that helped to reinforce their magical awareness. And we did guided journeys as part of getting them to sleep and stuff like that. So they had a very strong sense of internal reality.
Yeah, that's very important, is that, you know, as your children are growing up and they have times of talking about, oh, you know, like my daughter would say, Mommy, you know, I saw the little girl here again. You know, we would sit down and talk about it. Now I happen to know there's a little girl whose spirit is still here. I have a couple of them when I bought the house.
Yeah.
Who's talking? Okay. Who's Cedric?
He just joined, I'm guessing they haven't muted.
She's curvy. I like that.
Cedric, I think you're breaking up. So yeah, so you're right. It is very important that you help them identify the differences. You know, okay, this is what happened, and no, not everybody is going to see them. You know, I've always believed honesty is the best way. Same thing as my children got older and were interested in their bodies, the sex and stuff. I would answer whatever question they brought to me, you know. I did, somebody had a question here about keeping clothes on with the younger. Tammy, is that you?
Yeah, I think that modesty arrives kind of naturally somewhere around puberty.
Mhm.
But we live in a society that expects kids to keep their clothing on in public past about the age of 3. How do you say your body is beautiful and not teach them any kind of body shame, but also keep them from freaking out the other adults?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because
Can I approach that one?
Yeah.
Because I grew up in, I'm 70 now. I grew up in the 50s. And in the 50s, bathing suits were made of cotton. Getting back into a wet bathing suit was pure torture. So by and large, by noon, we had run through all the available bathing suits and we skinny dipped the whole time. So my parents' friends said that they had never seen any of us with clothes on until they visited in the winter. So we never had that issue in our household. But we discovered, to our shock and somewhat dismay, that when the kids hit puberty, suddenly they were asking us to keep our clothes on, whereas we would walk around without clothes the rest of the time. And I think that comes back down to respect. If it's making them uncomfortable, then you go along with their thing, because heck, puberty's hard enough without having your parents embarrass you. Not that we didn't have, I'm one of the few pagans I know where we actually did go out into the garden and fool around in the, and bless the garden that way. And allow me to say that a blanket is a good idea, because otherwise, you know, whoever's on the bottom is going to get sticks and stones poked into them.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
Yeah, we were very open with the kids And
Yep.
we'd say, oh yeah, hold on a second, we gotta wait. Okay, now that's what we call making love. And that was what at the end there where we're making funny noises. That's an orgasm. And it feels really good, but it's something that people like privacy. So if you see somebody doing that, just back out and come back in 10 minutes. And that was our sex talk to little kids.
Mm-hmm.
Your mileage will vary. Everybody has to know their own kids. That you can't use the same rules for everybody's. So that's one of the things you were talking about ghosts. When you're dealing with spirits, you have to tell the kids that some people can see them, some people can't. If you've done a lot of sensory games, so you've taught the kids to feel or see auras, they begin to understand that not everybody has the same abilities. So you can present a lot of psychic practice as games, and the kids can learn them, which is, I think, helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny now that my children are both grown. My daughter is married, and we have a beautiful little grandson who he's autistic. When I heard Cammy talking about it, and this is the first time we've had somebody in our family, so this is all very new to us. But my daughter's her religion now, she doesn't have a specific religion, but it really focuses on her ancestors and the connection to the world around us. Where my son's religion is, he believes God is in everything. So for him, God, there's a spark of God in everything, whether living or not living, like a rock or whatever. He believes there are a little part of God's in there. So yeah, I mean, they still come, and my daughter's now the president of the CWPN. And so they're all very involved with what we're doing. And we teach our grandson this too, as much as we can. But we want it to be passed down from generation to generation. And my children were also brought up Christian at the same time, because both of our parents were Christian. So they would go to church on Sunday, but then they would do the other stuff on, the Sabbaths and moons and stuff like that. But it gave them the opportunity to experience both. And if they wanted to go somewhere else, I always told them, I will take you. You want to see what it's like to be Jewish or whatever, I will take you. I would rather have you experience stuff so you know what's it about. I had a conversation with a very good friend of ours who was atheist. He had a daughter, and she was interested in learning about voodoo. And he was really not happy with it. He didn't really care what it was. He was atheist. He didn't believe in it. He thought it was just all bull crap. And I used to say to him, what you're not looking at is this. If you stop her from learning from people you know and trust, then she will learn from people you don't know and may not trust. And they may teach her totally different things. I said, so which would you rather have? Would you rather have her be educated by someone you know who you can talk to, or would you have her want to meet somebody online she doesn't know because she has an interest? And he decided he'd rather have her be with people who he knew, so he could also ask questions and any concerns he may have. But that's one of those things that some people just don't even think about. They don't think about what will happen if I do nothing, if I just ignore it. Tammy?
So my family are Jewish. They're not super religious, but they're very culturally identified. So the kids went with us to synagogue and saw how that was done. They went with friends of ours. They went to their Phelan's Godbrothers First Communion. What I said to them is, look for the magic in it, look for the sense of the sacred, look for your experience of the divine, but be aware that you shouldn't make a promise without knowing what that promise is and being willing to actually reinforce it, live it. So no, don't go up with Zach when he goes to take his communion unless you are in a position to accept the promise that God has given and that responsibility. Neither of my kids were bar mitzvah because when they were 13, they were neither of them at a developmental level, well, the older one at a developmental level where he could make that decision, nor were they willing to make that commitment. And, on they go. The younger one doesn't have a religious identity. They lean sort of Buddhist-ish. And the older one had a roommate at one point who was a English clergyman student, whatever, that had come to be a Baptist missionary. He eventually got disillusioned, poor kid, and went back to England. But the two of them decided that they were going to stay up all night and fix the world.
Yeah, that's it, right? But yeah, I mean, that's really what we look at when we're raising our children, is to be honest with them, to share our knowledge, to give them good guidelines, and be able to try to handle situations that may arise with people outside of the family or even inside the family. Some families are very torn by this. Try to stay calm and put a goal, whatever that goal is that you want to achieve, and then look at how you can achieve that goal. It's easier to have the goal first than to have the way to do it and then try to figure out what the goal is. And like I said, we were very lucky. We never had a problem. Actually, my kids were really good kids. Never had to deal with police with them. Never had them, get in trouble at school. My son got in trouble, I think, once because kids were picking on him, and he got bullied a lot. And they called us in because he decided to get a pair of vampire teeth, and he turned to the bully and he said, "If you touch him one more time, I'm going to drain all your blood," or something like that. So we get called in, and I'm like, "What happened?" And they told us, and I'm like, "Well, where's those other kids' parents?" Well, they go, "What do you mean?" I said, "They were bullying my son. That's the first problem. My son wouldn't have done that if he didn't feel safe, So he felt threatened, and he was the only way he could think of protecting himself. So where are those children's parents?" And they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, we're going to have to call them in." I said, "Yeah, you think that's a good idea?" I said, "Because if it happens again and my son come home and tell me he's being bullied," I said, "it's going to be a totally different conversation we're having." So after that, we didn't have any more problems.
Yeah.
But that's all we can do.
Bullying is a problem for everybody, I think.
It is.
But that is that's a biggie.
Yeah.
Protecting yourself is, I think, right. I'm going to have another embarrassing one. A don't do what Chipicon did. I was enjoying watching my youngest child she wouldn't call it attacked. She would call it convincing or proselytizing, probably, an adult in public. And this 5-year-old was responding beautifully and refuting her arguments as she tried to talk her into Christianity and out of paganism. And it occurs to me now that I should have stepped in and spoken to the woman myself. I was just enjoying how well she was doing. But little kids should not be forced to defend themselves against authority figures, even if that authority figure is simply another adult. And that is one of the regrets, that I did not step in at that point, because she was great. She was marvelous. My kids have been brought up to argue, to use logic. One of my proudest moments, a bunch of teenagers. Do you know teenagers? We had like 4 or 5 teenagers in the barn, and they came in and said, "You don't happen to have a copy of the Quran in here, do you?" And we said, "Yeah, it's right over there beside the Talmud in the religious section." And they ran in and got it, and they took it back out to the barn, and where they were discussing world religions. And I was like, yes, I love it.
That's
So
great.
the way they were raised, they were allowed to go to church. They were allowed to try other flavors. And
Everybody supported them no matter what.
yeah, you have to be ready to say, Jesus has come into my life and I'm going to follow Jesus. And he's like, okay, if you're going to let them follow Coyote, if you're going to let them follow Apollo, or Thor, and Thor continues to be our favorite around here because he's just so cool.
Yeah, that is true.
Thor is user friendly.
Yep. Thor is the God of the people.
But you really do need to support them in whatever they choose.
Yeah.
And
and
so
try to have their backs whatever you can. But I always told my children too, as they were growing up, I would say to them, I will have your back so long as you're not in the wrong. Because if you're in the wrong, I'm going to hold you responsible. And they knew that. They always know from the time they were very young that that's how we felt about it, is that if you do something wrong, you're going to have, that's the consequences. You have to take responsibility. Okay. If what they're doing or what the punishment is way above what it should be, then yeah, we're going to step into that. I said, but if it's something you did and you knew it was wrong, then you take the consequences that go with it. However, if what you're doing is right and they're, putting you in that position, because schools are notorious. I don't know if any of you ever had to deal with a child with learning disabilities, but the first time I was very lucky. I had a friend who was a student advocate, so she taught me all these things to do. And I went in and they did this a test that you take home. They do part in school and part at home. It's for ADHD or ADD. And I come now, mind you, I have a nephew that is diagnosed by a bunch of doctors that he has ADHD. So I come in and I sit down, and you're sitting at a table by yourself usually. And there is like 4 people on this side, 4 people on that side, and the principal or vice principal. And they're all here to talk to you. So, they're talking to me, they got the test results, and they said, this is your son's problem. He has ADD. And I said, do you have the test? And they're like, yeah. And I said, can I see it? And they're like, why? I said, I have the right to see it if this is what you're using to make a determination. And they're like, okay. They give it to me. And lo and behold, my son had ADD during school, but at home he didn't. And I looked at that and I went, okay. I said, I have a nephew who has this condition. It doesn't turn off when he goes home. It is on 24 hours a day. I said, so my son does not have this. And the school psychiatrist was there and she's going, but Mrs. Kimble, you need to understand that if your child does have this, there's medication that you can give him and he'll do so much better. And I said, but what if he doesn't? She goes, but it looks like he does. I said, listen, I will tell you, I know for a fact I have a true diagnosis. You're supposed to have it from your primary care doctor, a neurologist, a psychologist, and there was like 2 other things that you were supposed to have to get that diagnosis. Now, this was, mind you, again, back about 25 years ago. Prices may be much easier now. And she was like, well, I have a son that has this, and you don't understand what it's like. And, if he forgets his meds, I'll run down the driveway to give it to him before he gets on the bus. I looked at this lady and I said, well, I kind of feel sorry for your son. And she's like, what? And I said, how many students do you think you have in this school that have this condition? She goes, gotta be at least a third. I said, a third. You think a third of these children have this condition? And she's like, well, yeah. And how do you determine that? Well, they take that test. I said, but that test isn't a good tool to use to judge this. I said, it definitely isn't the standard that you're supposed to use. So we went and got my son tested, actually, and found out what he has is a processing disorder like his mother. And it means that when information comes in, we have trouble pulling it back out. Like, we're usually very bad at spelling. because we don't hear the phonetic sounds all the time, or we can't place the letter with the sound. So we had to modify a bunch of stuff. But if you've ever been through the process, you know it's taunting because you have all this paperwork and they do all these plans. And then when you meet with them again, you've got 10 people in there who are all telling you what you should do. And yet you're trying to be like, what is the best for my kids? You know, what is the best thing for them? Don't tell me that the best thing is to medicate them and sit them in a room, because if they did have the condition, I've seen medication work. But if they don't have the condition, it doesn't necessarily make things better. So you really need to know what is the problem that they're dealing with. And they're very quick to just jump to, this is the easiest solution, you know, be able to deal with the kids that way. So, you know, it's hard. It's hard being a parent nowadays. Like I said, especially if you have any child with any special needs, that you are trying to make sure they get everything that they need and all the support they need to be able to grow up to be, you know, responsible, functioning adults as well. Because that's really the goal, right? Is that we want our children to grow up, to be responsible, to, you know, be loving and caring. And, you know, hopefully they have a family of their own, that it continues.
Well, I am going to cut us off there, which is just brilliant. I very much like that. Is a good place to end. Mm-hmm. Because this was a really great show. I hope lots of people will see it on YouTube who weren't here for the live. Mm-hmm. But we have to end it now because it's going long, and hope to see you next week. I think next week I've got Robin Kenstein, who is talking about healing and counseling the dead. Okay. So that will be fun.
Is it 8 o'clock?
Thank Mary and also Katie and Cammie and the others for joining us and sharing this information. And we will and oh yes, and I need to say, try and come to the conference. Please look at your the conference is going to be from the 7th to the 13th in November this year, virtually. And if you go to Changing Times, Changing Worlds, and look at the various cool things, the .net, and I'm beginning to blither. It's time for me to hit the button.
Going to be the end of our day here. Thank you again for inviting me to
thank you for coming.
Yeah, nice to meet you.